Hey, what's up, everyone? It's me, Dre. Just want to make this video. One of my friends on YouTube had asked me to give my thoughts about the recent coverage in which Eric Holder had mentioned with the investigation from the Department of Justice in regards to the Ferguson Police Department and some of the racial disparage within the community and the police department. So I just want to read a little bit of information on CNN.com. They did document the findings from the Department of Justice. I'm going to leave a link for that. It's fairly extensive. I didn't get to read all of it, but there's some very interesting information, especially at the very beginning when they're talking about police practices, focus on generating revenue through improper ticketing and fees that were charged to citizens, things like that. I'm just going to read a little bit of this. Once again, I encourage you to go on to, or at least click on the link and read some of this information. Really damning information for the police department, but it also speaks on some of the racial divide in the Ferguson area where the community is at odds with law enforcement, and there's no wonder that there's such a distrust in the community. And this is just with black people, because once again, I live down here in South Texas, predominantly Mexican. There's black people sprinkled around. There's white people. There's Middle Eastern. There's Middle East, not Middle Eastern, but there's Asian. All walks of life live down here, and there's law enforcement of pretty much every ethnicity, but it's almost predominantly Mexican American here. So I don't know of any distrust within the community. Of course, you're going to have your knuckleheads, your lawbreakers, people doing wrong shit. So, of course, they have a reason to not like the police. But that's going to be anywhere you go. But for something like this, as a black man speaking on behalf, not of every black person, but for those out there, I can certainly understand why, because of everything that's happening. And I did cover the Mike Brown incident with Darren Wilson, and I do think it's fucked up simply because you talk about a young man, no matter what he did, the fact that he got shot, the manner in which he was killed, I think it was excessive force, and you have a cop getting away scot-free with murder. But when I'm reading this, not so much about generating revenue, I'll talk about that in a brief moment. But when it talks about police practices, it just says here, officers expect and demand compliance even when they lack legal authority. They are inclined to interpret and exercise the exercise of free speech rights as unlawful disobedience, innocent movements as physical threats, indications of mental or physical illness as belligerence. Police supervisors and leadership do too little to ensure that officers act in accordance with the law and policy, and rarely respond meaningfully to civilian complaints of officer misconduct. The result is a pattern of stops without reasonable suspicion and arrests without probable cause in violation of the Fourth Amendment. Infringement on these free expression, as well as retaliation for protected expression in violation of the First Amendment, and excessive force in violation of the Fourth Amendment. This does go on to talk about one incident. For example, in the summer of 2012, a 32-year-old African-American man sat in his car cooling off after playing basketball in the Ferguson public park. An officer pulled up beside the man's car, blocking him in, and demanded the man's social security number and identification. Without any cause, the officer accused the man of being a pedophile, referring to him as the presence of children in the park, and ordering the man out of his car for a pat down, although the officer had no reason to believe the man was armed. The officer also asked to search the man's car. The man objected, citing his constitutional rights. In response, the officer arrested the man, reportedly at gunpoint, charging him with 8 violations of Ferguson's municipal code. One charge, making a false declaration, was for initially providing the short form of his name, Mike, instead of Michael, and an address which, although legitimate, was different from the one on the driver's license. Another charge was for not wearing a seatbelt, even though he was seated in a parked vehicle. So that's just one instance of the bullshit and misconduct that caused the mistrust. And also when it comes to municipal court practices, in effort to generate revenue. They give an instance of what happened to a woman back in 2007. For example, an African American woman who had a still pending case stemming from 2007. When on a single occasion she parked her car illegally. She received 2 citations and a $151 fine plus fees. The woman, who experienced financial difficulties and periods of homelessness over several years, was charged with 7 failure to appear offenses for missing court dates or fine payments on her parking tickets between 2007 and 2010. For each failure to appear, the court issued an arrest warrant and imposed new fines and fees. From 2007 to 2014, the woman was arrested twice, spent 6 days in jail, and paid $550 in court to the court for an occurrence that was only the cost of $151. So things like that. When you're talking about racial bias, one of the things that the Department of Justice found out, and there were also some damning emails by some employees. One of the employees was fired for making an inflammatory comment about the president, as well as about black people in general. But in this instance of racial bias, Ferguson's approach to law enforcement both reflects and reinforces racial bias, including stereotyping. The harms of Ferguson's police and court practices are borne disproportionately by African Americans, and there is evidence that this is due in part to intentional discrimination on the basis of race. Ferguson's law enforcement practices overwhelmingly impact African Americans. Data collected by the Ferguson Police Department from 2012 to 2014 shows that African Americans account for 85% of vehicle stops, 90% of citations, and 93% of arrests made by the Ferguson Police Department officers, despite comprising only 67% of Ferguson's population. African Americans are more than twice as likely as white drivers to be searched during vehicle stops, even after controlling for non-race based variables, such as the reason a vehicle stop was initiated, but are found in possession of contraband 26% less often than white drivers, suggesting officers are impermissibly considering race as a factor when determining whether to search. African Americans are more likely to be cited and arrested following a stop, regardless of why the stop was initiated, and are more likely to receive multiple citations during a single incident. From 2012 to 2014, FPD issued four or more citations to African Americans on 73 occasions, but issued 4 or more citations to non-African Americans only twice. It's pretty fucked up. FPD appears to bring certain offenses almost exclusively against African Americans. For example, from 2011 to 2013, African Americans accounted for 95% of manner of walking and roadway charges and 94% of all failure to comply charges. So it's things like this that cause people to be against the police. I'm not against the police because I live down here in South Texas. I've never had any issues with the police. I've been pulled over, yes, and those reasons were my fault because I'm not wearing a seatbelt, and I got busted for that. So there's no complaints from me about in which I was stopped. I was never well, actually, I was profiled once when I lived in Arlington, where I came out of a community. I was driving a Honda Accord, and when the officer pulled me over, suddenly 2 other cops pulled up, and when I asked why I was being pulled over, the cops said, well, there's been a report of foreign cars from that neighborhood having been stolen. Like, a nigga can't drive a car that's not American. So that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. That happened a long time ago, so it's water under the bridge now. But it's just things like this. This video has kind of gone on a little bit longer than I intended, but I just wanted to give some of the examples of what Eric Holder was talking about with the investigation from the Department of Justice. Once again, do yourself a favor and go to the link and read some of this information of the findings. There's a lot of people out there that still believe that racism doesn't exist, but it does, and it's unfortunate because there's a lot of people who try to abide by the law that are negatively impacted by shit like this. Anyway, if you like this video, I hope that you like, subscribe, and share. Peace.